Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Mr. Cummings will be with us momentarily as another committee assignment is also pressing on his schedule. Last week, we learned that the United States of America may have had what may be the most devastating cyber attack in our nation's history, and that this may have been happening over a long period of time. As we sit here this morning, there's a lot of confusion about exactly what personal information for millions of current and former federal employees and workers were exposed through the latest data breach at the Office of Personnel Management. OPM initially reported that the personnel information of more than 4 million federal employees was exposed during this attack. More recent public reports suggest that the breach was perhaps much worse than that. It's also unclear exactly what information was exposed. We would like to know what information was exposed over what period of time and who has this vulnerability. It would also be great to know who had conducted this attack. And I think we need to have candor with not only the federal employees, but the American people as well. The breach potentially included highly sensitive personal background information collected through the security clearance applications. We would like clarity on that position as well. The loss of this information puts our federal workforce at risk, particularly our intelligence officers and others working on sensitive projects throughout the globe. But we're concerned about each and every federal worker and the public who has interacted with the government and entrusted this information with the government. We need to understand why the federal government and OPM in particular is struggling to guard some of our nation's most important information. The fact that OPM was breached should come as no surprise, given its troubled track record on data security. This has been going on for years, and it is inexcusable. Each year, the Office of Inspector General reviews and rates its respective agencies' compliance with the Federal Information Security Standards. According to the last 8 years of IG reports, OPM's data security posture was akin to leaving all the doors and windows open in your house and expecting that nobody would walk in and nobody would take any information. How wrong they were. Since 2007, the OPM Inspector General rated OPM's data security as, quote, a material weakness, end quote, because the agency had no IT policies or procedures that could come anywhere close to something that could be used as an excuse for securing the information. It's unbelievable to think the agency charged with maintaining and protecting all personal information of almost all former and current federal employees would have had so few information technology policies or procedures in place. Let me just kind of read through some of the reports that have happened through the course of the years. This is the Inspector General from fiscal year 2009. This year, we are expanding the material weakness to include the agency's overall information security governance programs and incorporating our concerns about the agency's information security management structure. The continuing weakness at OPM's information security program result directly from inadequate governance. Most, if not all of the exceptions we noted in this year resulted from a lack of necessary leadership, policy, and guidance. Go to fiscal year 2010. We continue to consider the IT security management structure insufficient. Insufficient staff and the lack of policies and procedures to be a material weakness in OPM's IT security program. Fiscal year 2011, we continue to believe that the information security governance represents a material weakness at OPM's IT security program. Fiscal year 2012, throughout fiscal year 2012, the OCIO, the Office of the Chief Information Officer, continued to operate with a decentralized IT security structure that did not have the authority or resources available to adequately implement new policies. However, the material witness remains open in this report as the agency's IT security function remained decentralized throughout fiscal year 2012, FSMA reporting period, and because of the continued instances of non-compliance with FSMA requirements. Goes on later. However, the OCIO's statement is inaccurate, as there were in fact, let me go back. The OCIO's response to our draft audit report indicated that they disagree with the classification of the material weakness because of the program that OPM has made with its IT security program and because there was no loss of sensitive data during the fiscal year. But as the Inspector General pointed out, however, the OCIO's statement is inaccurate, as there were in fact numerous information security incidents in fiscal year 2012 that led to the loss of or unauthorized release of mission-critical and sensitive data. They couldn't even decide and agree that they had lost the data back in 2012, the fiscal year 2012, let alone actually solve the problem. Go to fiscal year 2013. Again, the Inspector General, the findings in this audit report highlight the fact that OPM's decentralized governance structure continues to result in many instances of noncompliance with FSMA requirements. Therefore, we are again reporting this issue as a material weakness in fiscal year 2013. Fast forward to fiscal year 2014. This is November of 2014. 11 major OPM information systems are operating without valid authorization. This represents a material weakness in the internal control structure at OPM's IT security program. It goes on. OPM does not maintain a comprehensive inventory of servers, databases, and network devices. They don't even know what they have. They don't even know what's in the inventory. Program offices are not adequately incorporating known weakness into plans of action and milestones, and the majority of systems contained are over 120 days overdue. OPM continues to implement its continuous monitoring plan. However, security controls for all OPM systems are not adequately tested in accordance with their own policies. Not all OPM systems have conducted contingency plan tests in fiscal year 2014. Several information security agreements between OPM and contract-operated information systems have expired. Multi-factor authentication is not required to access OPM systems in accordance with the OMB memorandum. This has been going on for a long time. And yet when I read the testimony that was provided here, we're about to hear some, hey, we're doing a great job. You're not. It's failing. This went on for years, and it did not change. The Inspector General found that 11 of the 47 major information systems, or roughly 23%, at OPM lacked proper security authorization, meaning the security of 11 major systems was completely outdated and unknown. 5 of the 11 systems were in the office of the Chief Information Officer, Ms. Seymour. They were in your office, which is a horrible example to be setting as the person in charge of the agency's data security. The IG only recently upgraded OPM to a, quote, significant deficiency, end quote. In November 2014, FSMA, over 65% of all systems operated by OPM reside on 2 of the systems without valid authorization. Sitting on 2 systems, no valid authorization, 65% of the information. And for any agency to consciously disregard its data security for so long is grossly negligent. And the fact that the agency that did this is responsible for maintaining highly sensitive information for almost all federal employees, in my opinion, is even more egregious. OPM isn't alone. A number of other agencies also suffered breaches in the last year. This latest cyber hack comes on the heels of several data breaches that cost the government, including the Postal Service, the State Department, the Internal Revenue Service, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and even the White House. And at the same time, government is spending more and more on information technology. Last year across government, we, the American people, spent almost $80 billion on information technology, and it stinks. It doesn't work. $80 billion later, and the person in charge of security, the person who's in charge of making sure there's authentication of our systems, even in her own office there isn't the authorization needed. OPM is not alone in the blame for this failure. The Office of Management and Budget has the responsibility for setting standards for federal cybersecurity practices. And it's OMB's job to hold agencies accountable for complying and enforcing these standards. The Department of Homeland Security has been given the lead responsibility for serving as the federal government's so-called geek squad to monitor day-to-day cybersecurity practices. But the technical tools that DHS has deployed to try to protect federal networks apparently isn't doing the job. While DHS has developed Einstein to monitor government networks, it only detects known intruders, proving that it's completely useless in the latest OPM hacks. The status quo cannot continue. We have to do better. We're talking about the most vital information of the most sensitive nature of the people that we care about most. The people entrust that information to OPM. And through the years, it has been a complete and total, utter failure, to the point we find ourselves where millions of Americans are left wondering what somebody knows about them. What are they supposed to do? And I've read the letter that you've been sending out to employees, and it's grossly inadequate. It's grossly inadequate. And that's why we're having this hearing here today. We do appreciate y'all being here. I think what we're going to do now is I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Texas who's the chairman of the subcommittee that we have in IT. We at the Oversight and Government Reform Committee have set up a new subcommittee that deals just with IT issues. We're honored and pleased to have Mr. Hurd chairing that committee, so I'll now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not only as the head of this subcommittee, but as a former intelligence officer who's been through background investigations and whose information probably resides with OPM, I'm concerned. And today's hearing is just another example of the undeniable fact that America is under constant attack. It's not bombs dropping or missiles launching, it's the constant stream of cyber weapons aimed at our data. From private sector innovations to military secrets, our enemies are attempting to rob this country on a daily basis, and unfortunately, they are succeeding. The worst of these cyber attacks are not coming from the caves of Afghanistan or Syria, but from air-conditioned office buildings in China, Iran, and Russia, far from battlefields. These hackers work with impunity, knowing that their actions have no consequences. This is not only a question of how we can protect our networks and data, but of how we define the appropriate responses for digital-on-digital attacks. This is one of the questions I've been asking for years, and I've continued to ask in my role as chairman of the Information Technology Subcommittee. It's no secret that federal agencies need to improve their cybersecurity posture. We have for years and years of reports highlighting the vulnerabilities at federal agencies, from legacy systems to poor FISMA compliance. And while there have been improvements, they have not kept pace with the nature of the threats we are facing. But until agency leadership takes control of these basic cybersecurity measures, things like strong authentication, network monitoring, encrypting data, and segmentation, we will always be playing catch-up against our highly sophisticated and well-resourced adversaries. I welcome the witnesses here today and look forward to their testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from Illinois, the ranking member of the subcommittee in IT, Ms. Kelly, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank our expert witnesses for their participation today, and I thank the chairman and ranking member for holding this important hearing on the OPM data breach. As you know, I have the privilege of serving as a ranking member of the IT subcommittee. The issue of data breach is something that Chairman Hurd and I are quite concerned with, and we are looking forward to working with our colleagues to be active in addressing this issue. All of us here today should be quite concerned. The OPM breach has raised significant questions about how adequately the personnel information of government employees is stored on government networks. We know that every day our government and American businesses face a barrage of cyber threats. We're reminded of many of the high-profile breaches on some of our nation's most important companies, but there are everyday cyber intrusions of our data that aren't making the headlines. Whether it's criminals beyond our borders profiting from fraud and identity theft, domestic competitors who steal intellectual property to gain advantage, or hacktivists looking to make a statement against governments, cybercrime threatens our national security and economic prosperity. Data breaches probably won't end anytime soon, but they are something that we can be more aggressive in addressing. As we catch on to cyber attackers' methods, these bad actors will look to innovate their way around newly integrated cyber defenses. This is why we must be just as innovative. That's why we must have a frank conversation today and prepare a multi-front strategy to ward off and diminish the possibility of future data breaches. So I thank the committee and our witnesses again for this opportunity to examine the OPM attack, and with that, I yield back.
Thank the gentlewoman. It is our intention to hear the ranking member, Mr. Cummings' statement, but I think what we will do now is swear in the witnesses, hear their statements, then we will go to Mr. Cummings before we get to questions. That's okay with everybody. I will also hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who'd like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our first panel of witnesses. We're pleased to welcome the Honorable Catherine Archuleta, who's the Director of Office of Personnel Management. Dr. Andy Osment, Assistant Secretary of the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications at the National Programs Preparedness Directorate at the United States Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Tony Scott, U.S. Chief Information Officer of the Office of E-Government and Information Technology at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. Ms. Sylvia Burns, Chief Information Officer of the United States Department of Interior. Ms. Donna Seymour, Chief Information Officer of the United States Office of Personnel Management. And Mr. Michael Esser, did I pronounce that properly? Esser, Assistant Inspector General for Audits Office of the Inspector General at the United States Office of Personnel Management. We welcome you all. Pursuant to committee rules, witnesses are all to be sworn before they testify. If you will please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate your limiting your testimony to 5 minutes. We will, again, please limit your comments to 5 minutes. I'll be a little bit generous, but 5 minutes if you could, and then your entire written statement will be entered into the record. At the conclusion of those, then we will hear from Mr. Cummings with his opening statement, and we will go to questions from there. So with that, we will now recognize Ms. Archuleta, the Director of the Office of Personnel Management, and you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, I'm here today to talk to you about 2 successful intrusions into OPM systems and data. But first, I want to deliver a message to federal employees, retirees, and their families. The security of their personnel data is of paramount importance. We are committed to full and complete investigation of these incidents and are taking actions to mitigate vulnerabilities exposed by these intrusions. When I was sworn in as director 18 months ago, I recognized that in order to build and manage an engaged, inclusive, and well-trained workforce, that we would need a thorough assessment of the state of information technology at OPM. I immediately became aware of vulnerabilities in our aging legacy systems, and I made the modernization and the security of our network one of my top priorities. Government and non-government entities are under constant attack by evolving and advanced persistent threats and criminal actors. These adversaries are sophisticated, well-funded, and focused. These attacks will not stop. If anything, they will increase. Within the last year, we have undertaken an aggressive effort to update our cybersecurity posture, adding numerous tools and capabilities to our networks. As a result, in April of 2015, the FBI, and together with these partners, initiated an investigation to determine the scope and the impact of the intrusion. In May, the Interagency Incident Response Team concluded that the exposure of personnel records had occurred, and notifications to affected individuals began on June 8th and will continue through June 19th. As part of our ongoing notification process, we are continuing to learn more about the systems that contributed to individuals' data potentially being compromised. These individuals were included in the previously identified population of approximately 4 million individuals and are being appropriately notified. For example, we have now confirmed that any federal employee from across all branches of government whose organizations submitted service history records to OPM may have been compromised, even if their full personnel file is not stored on OPM's system. During the course of the ongoing investigation, the interagency incident response team concluded later in May that additional systems were likely compromised. This separate incident, which also predated deployment of our new security tools and capabilities, remains under investigation by OPM and our interagency partners. However, there is a high degree of confidence that systems related to background investigations of current, former, and prospective federal government employees and those for whom a federal background investigation was conducted may have been exfiltrated. While we have not yet determined its scope or its impact, we are committed to notifying those individuals whose information may have been compromised as soon as practicable. Throughout these investigations, we have provided regular updates to congressional leadership and the relevant committees of these incidents. But for the fact that we implemented new, more stringent security tools, we would have never known that malicious activity had previously existed on that network and would not have been able to share that information for the protection of the rest of the federal government. In response to these incidents and working with our partners at DHS, we have immediately implemented additional security measures to protect sensitive information and to take steps toward building a simplified, modern, and flexible network structure. We continue to execute on our aggressive plan to modernize OPM's platform and bolster security tools. Our 2016 budget request includes an additional $21 million above 2015 funding levels to further the support of the modernization of our IT infrastructure, which is critical to protecting data from the persistent adversaries we face. This funding will help us sustain the network security upgrades and maintenance initiated in fiscal year 2014 and fiscal year 2015 to improve our cyber posture, including advanced tools such as database encryption, stronger firewalls, storage devices, and masking software. The funding will also support the redesign of OPM's legacy network. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Osment.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. Like you, my fellow panelists, and countless Americans, I am deeply concerned about the recent compromise at OPM. I am personally dedicated to ensuring that we take all necessary steps to protect our federal workforce and to drive forward the cybersecurity of the entire federal government. Director Archuleta and my written statement both spoke to the facts of the OPM incident, so I want to focus my remarks on how DHS is accelerating our efforts to protect the federal government. This morning, I will discuss how the Department of Homeland Security is protecting civilian, federal agencies and helping those agencies better protect themselves. Under legislation passed by this Congress last year, federal agencies are responsible for their own cybersecurity. However, DHS provides a common baseline of security across the civilian government and helps agencies better manage their cyber risks through 4 key efforts. First, we protect agencies by providing a common set of capabilities through the Einstein and Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation, or CDM, programs. Second, we measure and motivate agencies to implement best practices. Third, we serve as a hub for information sharing. And finally, we provide incident response assistance when agencies suffer a cyber intrusion. I will focus this morning on the first area, how DHS provides a baseline of security across the federal government through Einstein and CDM. I have described the other 3 areas in my written statement, and I'm happy to take your questions on them. Our first line of defense against cyber threats is the Einstein system, which protects agencies at the perimeter. A useful analogy is that of a physical government facility. In this analogy with the physical world, Einstein 1 is similar to a camera at the entrance to the facility that records the traffic coming and going and identifies anomalies in the number of cars. Einstein 2 adds the ability to detect suspicious cars based upon a watch list and to alert security personnel when a prohibited vehicle is identified. Einstein 2 does not stop cars, but it does set off an alarm. Einstein 1 and 2 are fully deployed and screening approximately 90% of all federal civilian traffic, all of the traffic that goes through trusted internet connections. The latest phase of the program, known as Einstein 3A, is akin to a guard post at the highway that leads to multiple government facilities. Einstein 3A uses classified information to look at the cars and compare them with a classified watch list. It then actively blocks prohibited cars from entering the facility. We are accelerating our efforts to protect all civilian agencies with Einstein 3A. The system now covers 15 federal civilian agencies with over 930,000 federal personnel, which is approximately 45% of the civilian government, and those are protected with at least one of two security countermeasures. That is about double the coverage we had just 9 months ago. During this time, Einstein 3A has blocked over 550,000 attempts to access potentially malicious websites, which is one of our two countermeasures. Einstein played a key role in identifying the recent compromise of OPM data at the Department of Interior. As we accelerate Einstein deployment, we also recognize that security cannot be achieved through only one type of tool. Einstein will never be able to block every threat. For example, it must be complemented with systems and tools to monitor inside agency networks. Our CDM program addresses this challenge. Returning to our analogy of a government facility, CDM Phase 1 allows agencies to continuously check building locks and security cameras to ensure they are operating as intended. Continuing the analogy, the next two phases will monitor personnel at the facility to ensure they are not engaged in unauthorized activity, and it will assess activity across the facility to detect unusual patterns. We have provided CDM Phase 1 capabilities to 8 agencies covering over 50% of the federal government, and we expect to cover 97% of the government by the end of this fiscal year. Now, the deadlines I have just told you are when DHS will provide a given capability. It will take a few additional months for agencies to fully implement their side of both Einstein and CDM once they are available. And of course, agencies must supplement Einstein and CDM with additional tools appropriate to their needs. I'd like to conclude by noting that federal agencies are a rich target and will continue to experience frequent attempted intrusions. This problem is not unique to the government. As our detection methods continue to improve, we will in fact detect more incidents that are already occurring and we just didn't know it yet. The recent breach at OPM is emblematic of this trend, as OPM was able to detect the intrusion by implementing cybersecurity best practices recommended by DHS. We are facing a major challenge in protecting our most sensitive information against sophisticated, well-resourced, and persistent adversaries. Further, the entire nation is now making up for 20 years of underinvestment in our nation's cybersecurity in both the public and private sectors. In response, we in the government are accelerating the deployment of the tools we have and are bringing cutting-edge capabilities online. And we are asking our partner agencies and Congress to take action and work with us to strengthen the cybersecurity of federal agencies. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear today, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. You have a very impressive background. Your joining the federal government is much appreciated. We look forward to hearing your testimony. You now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about recent cyber incidents affecting federal agencies. I'd like to start by highlighting a very important point which has been mentioned already and of which I'm sure you're aware, but both state and non-state actors who are well-financed, highly motivated, and persistent are attempting to breach both government and non-government systems every day. And these attempts are not going away. They will continue to accelerate on two fronts. First, the attacks will become more sophisticated. And second, as we remediate and strengthen our own practices, our detection capabilities will improve. But that means we have to be as nimble, as aggressive, and as well-resourced as those who are trying to break into our systems. Confronting cybersecurity threats on a continuous basis is our nation's new reality, a reality that I faced in the private sector and am continuing to see here in my new role as Federal Chief Information Officer. As Federal CIO, I lead the Office of Management and Budget's Office of E-Government and Information Technology. My office is responsible for developing and overseeing the implementation of federal information technology policy. And even though my team has a variety of responsibilities, I'll focus today's remarks on cybersecurity. Under the Federal Information Security Modernization Act of 2014, most of us know this as FISMA, OMB is responsible for federal information security oversight and policy issuance. OMB executes its responsibilities in close coordination with its federal cybersecurity partners, including the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Commerce National Institute of Standards and Technology. As I mentioned in front of this committee in April, OMB also recently announced the creation of the first ever dedicated cybersecurity unit within my office. This is the team that's behind the work articulated in the fiscal year 2014 FISMA report, which highlighted both the successes and challenges facing federal agencies' cybersecurity programs. In FY 2015, the eGov Cyber Unit is targeting oversight through cyberstat reviews, prioritizing agencies with high risk factors as determined by cybersecurity performance and incident data. My colleagues will fully address the recent cyber incidents affecting the Office of Personnel Management, known as OPM. In terms of the role of OMB, my office monitors very closely all reports of incidents affecting federal networks and systems. We use these reports to look for trends and patterns, as well as for areas where our government-wide processes, policies, and practices can be strengthened. And we then update our guidance and coordinate with other agencies to ensure that that guidance is implemented. And as you heard from me last week, the recently passed Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, known as FITARA, and our guidance associated with that legislation strengthens the role of the CIO in agency cybersecurity. In this case, OPM notified OMB in April 2015 of an incident affecting data in transit in its network. OPM reported that they were working closely with various government agencies on a comprehensive investigation and response to this incident. We have been actively monitoring the situation and have been engaged in making sure that there's a government-wide response to the events at OPM. To further improve federal cybersecurity infrastructure and to protect systems against these evolving threats, OMB launched the 30-day cybersecurity sprint last week. The sprint will focus on two areas. First, an interagency team is creating a set of action plans and strategies to further address critical cybersecurity priorities. Second, agencies were directed to accelerate efforts to deploy threat indicators, patch critical vulnerabilities, and tighten policies and practices for privileged users, and to dramatically accelerate implementation of multi-factor authentication. In closing, I want to underscore a critical point I made at the beginning of this testimony. Both state and non-state actors are attempting to breach government and non-government systems in a very aggressive way. It's not going to go away, and we're going to see more of it. Ensuring the security of information on federal government networks and systems will remain a core focus of the administration as we move aggressively to implement innovative protections and respond to new challenges as they arrive. In addition to the actions we are taking, we also look forward to working with Congress on legislative actions that may further protect our nation's critical networks and systems. I thank the committee for holding this hearing and for your commitment to improving federal cybersecurity. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Burns, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Sylvia Burns, and I am the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of the Interior. I appreciate the opportunity to testify regarding DOI's efforts to secure and protect agency, customer, and employee data in the wake of recently discovered cyber intrusion. Additionally, we appreciate having had the opportunity to provide a classified briefing on the cyber intrusion for members of your committee staff and other congressional staff on May 21st, 2015. Cyber intruders executed very sophisticated tactics to obtain unauthorized access to OPM data hosted in a DOI data center, which contains sensitive personally identifiable information. The incident was and remains under active investigation. At present, the effort has not discovered evidence that any data other than OPM data was exfiltrated. DOI has initiated a major planning effort to address short, medium, and long-term remediation to strengthen our security protections and reduce risks to the department, our employees, our customers, and our partners. DOI takes the privacy and security of this data very seriously. In April, DHS's U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team, US CERT, informed DOI about a potential malicious activity, which was later determined to be a sophisticated intrusion on DOI's network. DOI immediately began working with US CERT, the FBI, and other federal agencies to initiate an investigation and determine what information may have been compromised. DOI allowed DHS and the other investigating agencies immediate access to the DOI computer systems, and DOI dedicated support to people to support the investigation. Although there is evidence that the adversary had access to the DOI data center's overall environment, today the investigation has not discovered evidence that any data other than OPM data was exfiltrated. However, the investigation remains ongoing. Concurrent with the investigation, DOI immediately initiated a major planning effort to address short, medium, and long-term remediation to strengthen our cybersecurity protections. We undertook those efforts in the context of other cybersecurity improvements which were already underway pursuant to the Department's commitment to the administration's cybersecurity cross-agency priority goals, as well as DHS's CDM program. We have now accelerated our work on pre-existing efforts while devising and implementing new security measures in consultation with the investigating agencies with the expertise related to this particular threat. Activities are underway include working with DHS to scan for specific malicious indicators across the entire DOI network. As part of DHS's binding operational directive, we are identifying and mitigating critical IT security vulnerabilities for all internet-facing systems, and at the direction of the Secretary and Deputy Secretary, we are doing the same for all of DOI's IT systems. This includes systems that are for DOI's internal use, as well as systems for the public and non-DOI users. We are acquiring and implementing new capabilities that will help us to detect and respond quickly to new intrusions. We continue to meet with interagency partners to learn about their activities and leverage their knowledge to make additional improvements to our cybersecurity posture at DOI. We are fully enabling two-factor authentication for all users. DOI's existing long-term plan includes several agency-wide strategic initiatives, including continuing our commitment to DHS's CDM program. We're almost done implementing hardware and software asset management, and we'll be adding new capabilities for application whitelisting, network access control, and dashboarding functionality to provide a comprehensive view of the department's security posture. We are strengthening DOI's cybersecurity and privacy workforce so that we have knowledgeable and experienced people to address current and future threats facing the agency. We are designing and implementing increased network segmentation so that if an intrusion occurs within one component of our network, we can better limit the extent of the exposure. We're evaluating data protection technologies such as information rights management for potential future investments. Again, DOI takes the privacy and security of its data very seriously. We are committed to supporting and continuing the investigation regarding the incident affecting OPM data. Furthermore, we will continue to be an active participant in the ongoing efforts by the federal government to improve our nation's overall cybersecurity posture. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, this concludes my prepared statement. I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Seymour, you now recognized for 5 minutes.
My remarks were included with the director. Thank you for having me here today, Chairman Chaffetz and Ranking Member Cummings, and I'll be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Esser, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Michael R. Esser. I am the Assistant Inspector General for Audits at U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Thank you for inviting me to testify at today's hearing on the IT security audit work performed by the OPM Office of the Inspector General. Today, I will be discussing OPM's long history of systemic failures to properly manage its IT infrastructure, which we believe ultimately led to the breaches we are discussing today. There are three primary areas of concern that we have identified through our audits during the past several years: information security governance, security assessment and authorization, and technical security controls. Information security governance is the management structure and processes that form the foundation of a successful security program. For many years, OPM operated in a decentralized manner, with the agency's program offices managing their IT systems. The agency CIO had ultimate responsibility for protecting these systems, but often did not have the access or control to do so. The program office staff responsible for IT security frequently had no IT background and performed this function in addition to their other full-time roles. As a result of this decentralized structure, many security controls remained unimplemented or untested, and all of our FISMA audits between 2007 and 2013 identified this as a serious concern. However, in 2014, OPM took steps to centralize IT security responsibility with the CIO. This new structure has resulted in improvement in the consistency and quality of security practices at OPM. Although we are optimistic about these improvements, it is apparent that the OCIO is still negatively impacted by years of decentralization. The second topic is security assessments and authorization. This is a comprehensive assessment of each IT system to ensure that it meets the applicable security standards before allowing the system to operate. OPM has a long history of issues related to system authorization as well. In 2010 and 2011, we noted serious concerns in this area, but after improvements were made, removed it as an audit concern in 2012. However, problems with OPM system authorizations have reappeared. In 2014, 21 OPM systems were due to receive a new authorization, but 11 were not authorized by year-end. Recently, the OCIO has temporarily put authorization efforts on hold while it modernizes OPM's IT infrastructure in response to security breaches, and so it is likely that the number will increase. While we support the effort to modernize systems, we believe that authorization activity should continue. The third topic relates to OPM's use of technical security controls. OPM has implemented a variety of controls and tools to make the agency's IT systems more secure. However, such tools are only helpful if they are used properly and cover the entire technical infrastructure. We have concerns that they are not. For example, we were told that OPM performs vulnerability scans on all computer servers using automated scanning tools. Although OPM was performing the scans, our audit also found that some were not done correctly and that some servers were not scanned at all. One significant control that is lacking altogether is the requirement for PIV credentials for two-factor authentication to access information systems. We also determined that OPM does not have an accurate centralized inventory of all servers and databases. Even if all OPM's security tools were being used properly, OPM cannot fully defend its network without a comprehensive list of assets. In closing, it is clear that even though security responsibility is now highly centralized under the OCIO, the recent security breaches indicate that OPM still has significant work to do to identify all of the assets and data that it is tasked with protecting and then take the steps to do so. Thank you for your time, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. And now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings of Maryland, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The recent cyber attack against the Office of Personnel Management is the latest in a series of aggressive attacks against our nation in both the public and private sectors. I want to put up a slide that lists some of the most significant breaches over the past few years. Anthem, 80 million people. J.P. Morgan, 76 million people. Target, 70 million people. OPM, at least 4 million so far. Then there was the Postal Service, Sony Pictures, and USIS. And this is not a comprehensive list by any means. Ladies and gentlemen, when you see this list, the picture is clear. The United States of America is under attack. Sophisticated cyber spies, many from foreign countries, are targeting the sensitive personal information of millions of Americans. They are attacking our government, our economy, our financial sector, our healthcare system, and virtually every single aspect of our lives. For more than 2 years, I've been pressing for our committee to investigate these cyber attacks. So I thank the chairman for holding today's hearing, and I hope we will hold similar hearings on many of these other attacks as well. With respect to the attack against OPM, my primary concern is who was targeted, government workers, and what foreign governments could do with this information. I have several questions for OPM. How many federal employees were indeed affected? What kind of information was compromised? And what steps are being taken to help these employees now? I also want to know how these attackers got inside of OPM's networks. Last year, cyber attackers penetrated the networks of USIS and Keypoint, two contractors that perform background checks for security clearances on behalf of OPM. One of the most critical questions we have today is, did these cyber attackers gain access to OPM's data systems using information they stole from USIS or Keypoint last year? Did they get the keys to OPM's network from one of its contractors? Mr. Chairman, I ask you to invite both Keypoint and USIS representatives here to testify today. You agreed to invite USIS, but last night, they refused, just as they have refused repeated requests for information over the past year. They did not offer someone else they thought would be appropriate. They simply refused. I do not say this lightly, Mr. Chairman, but I believe USIS and its parent company may now be obstructing this committee's work. We have suggested previously that the committee hold a transcribed interview. Given the history of non-compliance at USIS, I believe this may be one of the only ways to obtain the information we are seeking. Mr. Chairman, over the past 2 years, I've also been pressing to investigate ways to better protect personal information that belongs to the American people. Their financial records, their medical records, their credit card information, their Social Security numbers, and a host of other information they want to keep secure. I sought advice from some of the nation's top information security experts in private business and government. These experts warn that we cannot rely primarily on keeping the attackers out. We need to operate with the assumption that the attackers are already inside. They're already there. Last week, one of the world's foremost cybersecurity firms, Kaspersky Labs, was penetrated in a cyber attack. And according to FireEye, one of the companies my staff spoke with, the average amount of time a hacker remains undetected is more than 200 days. That's a lot of time. Obviously, we need strong firewalls and other defenses to keep attackers out. But experts recommend much more aggressive measures to wall off or segregate data systems to minimize the impact of inevitable data breaches in the future. Practices like data masking, redaction, and encryption must become the norm rather than the exception. Finally, we need to remember who the bad guys are here. They're not U.S. companies or federal workers who are trying to keep our information safe. The bad guys are the foreign nations and other entities behind these devastating attacks. According to law enforcement officials, North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran are the most advanced, persistent threats to this nation's cyber security. So as we move forward today, I want to caution everyone that as much as we want to learn about this attack, we have to do so in a responsible way. A lot of the information about the attack is classified. And the last thing we want to do is give our enemies information or compromise active law enforcement investigations. We're having a classified briefing for members at 1 p.m. today, so I encourage everyone to attend. And as I close, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for the bipartisan approach that you've taken on this issue. And I hope we can continue to investigate these and other breaches to identify common threats against our country and the best ways to counter them. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Archuleta, my question for you is, how big was this attack? How many federal workers have been compromised? We've heard 4 million. We've heard 14 million. What's the right number? Your microphone, please.
Sorry. During the course of the ongoing investigation into the cyber intrusion of OPM that compromised the personnel records of current and former federal employees that we announced last week, that number is approximately 4.2 million. In addition, in the investigation of that breach, we discovered, as I mentioned in my testimony, an additional OPM system was compromised. And these systems included information based on the background investigations of current, former, and prospective federal government employees as well as other individuals. Because different agencies feed into OPM background investigation systems in different ways, we are working with the agencies right now to determine how many of their employees were affected. We do not have that number at this time, but we will get back to you once we
What's your best estimate? Is the 14 million number wrong or accurate?
As I said before, we do not have an estimate because this is an ongoing investigation.
How far back does it go? The information that you're talking about former employees, current employees, and potential employees. So how far back does this information go that was in your system?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chaffetz. I would have to respond again is because it's an ongoing investigation.
It has nothing to do impeding an investigation. You should know what information you have and what you don't. So this is not going to slow down any investigation. People have a right to know. The employees have a right to know. How far back does your information database go that was compromised?
The legacy systems date back to 1985, but I do not.
So anything that's 1985?
No, sir, that would not be correct.
You don't know. Does it include military personnel?
As I said, this is an
This is a yes-no question. Does it include military personnel?
I would be glad to discuss that in a classified setting.
Does it include contractor information?
Again, I would be glad to discuss that in a classified setting.
There's nothing classified as to what information this includes. Does it include CIA personnel?
I would be glad to discuss that in a classified setting.
Does it include anybody who's filled out SF-86, the standard form 86?
The individuals who have completed an SF-86 and may be included in that, and we can provide additional information in a classified setting.
Why wasn't this information encrypted?
The encryption is one of the many tools that systems can use. I'll look to my colleagues at DHS for their response.
No, I want to know from you why the information wasn't encrypted. It's personal sensitive information. Birth dates, social security numbers, background information, addresses. Why wasn't it encrypted?
Data information encryption is a valuable
yeah, it's valuable. Why wasn't it?
And is an industry best practice. In fact, our cybersecurity framework promotes encryption as a key protection method.
Why didn't you?
Accordingly, OPM does utilize encryption.
We didn't ask you to come read statements. I want to know why you didn't encrypt the information.
An adversary possessing proper credentials can often decrypt data. It is not feasible to implement on networks that are too old. The limitations on encryptions is effective, on the encryptions, our effectiveness is why OPM is taking other steps, such as limiting administrators' accounts and requiring multi-factor authentication.
Okay, well, it didn't work, so you failed, okay? You failed utterly and totally. So the Inspector General, November 12, 2014, we recommend that the OPM director consider shutting down information systems that do not have current and valid authorization. And you chose not to. Why?
I appreciate the report by the IG. We work very closely with our IG, and take very seriously.
Okay, but he had a very serious recommendation to shut down the system. That's how bad it was, and you said no.
I'd like to turn that over to my.
No, I would like you to answer that question. You get to make the. It says we recommend that the OPM director consider shutting it down. Your response was the quote. The response back to the from the Office of Chief Information Officer, quote, the IT program managers will work with the ISSOs to ensure that OPM systems maintain current ATOs and that there are no interruptions to OPM's mission operations. Basically, you said no. The Inspector General was right. Your systems were vulnerable. The data was not encrypted. It could be compromised. They were right last year. They recommended it was so bad that you shut it down, and you didn't. And I want to know why.
There are many responsibilities we have with our data. And to shut down the system, we need to consider all of the responsibilities we have with the use of our systems.
So you made a conscious decision, knowing that it was vulnerable, that all these millions of records for federal employees was out there. The Inspector General pointed out the vulnerability, and you said, no, we're not making a change.
As the director of OPM, I have to take into consideration all of the work that we must do. It was my decision that we would not, but continue to develop the system and making sure that we have the security within those systems. The recommendation.
And did you do that? You didn't. You didn't, did you? That didn't happen, did it?
The recommendation after the recommendation to close down our systems came after the adversaries were already in our network.
When did they get in?
When did they get in network? Of our security systems that we were able to detect this intrusion.
When did they get into the system?
We detected the intrusion in April
of
2015.
So, but how did you know in November of 2014 that they were already, you didn't know if they were in there, did you?
No, we did not. We did not have the systems we did not have the security systems installed at that time. It was because we were able to add those security systems that we were able to detect.
So you detected the system? It wasn't a software provider that protected, you found it yourself?
OPM detected the intrusion.
So the New York Times and the others who wrote that were wrong?
That's correct.
Two more questions with your indulgence here. How many people have received letters?
There's a rolling number as we work from the first date of notification, January 8th. We will complete the notification to 4.2 million by June 19th. I'm sorry I don't have the exact date number as of today. I'd be glad to get that information for you.
One last question with everybody's indulgence here. Ms. Archuleta, there was a data breach at OPM in July of 2014, okay? This is what you said about your Ms. Seymour. In December, I was very fortunate to bring Donna Seymour from the Department of Defense on board. She has great experience with IT world and brought her talents to OPM. It was because of her leadership and her dedicated employees that we were able to make sure that none of this personal identifiable information was compromised. This was July of 2014. You cited her with the data breach as making sure that none of the personal identifiable information got out the door. Now that it has been hacked, are you going to give her that same amount of credit?
I do give her that same amount of credit. Sir, when I began my tenure as the director of OPM, one of my first priorities was to develop an IT strategic plan and to develop the important pillar of cybersecurity within our systems. We have worked very hard since that time, and as we update these legacy systems, it's important that we recognize that there is a persistent and aggressive effort on the part of these actors to not only intrude in our system, but systems throughout government and indeed in the private sector.
Well, you have completely and utterly failed in that mission if that was your objective. The Inspector General has been warning about this since 2007. There have been breach after breach. He recommended shutting it down last year, and you made a conscious decision to not do that. You kept it open, the information was vulnerable, and the hackers got it. I don't know if it's the Chinese, the Russians, or wherever else, but they've got it, and they're going to prey upon the American people. That's their goal and objective, and you made a conscious decision to leave that information vulnerable. It was the wrong decision. It was in direct contradiction to what the Inspector General said should happen, and you've been warning about it for years.
I would note that in the IG's report that he acknowledges the fact that we've taken important steps in reforming our IT systems. Advanced tools take time.
So what kind of grade would you give yourself? You succeeding or failing?
Cybersecurity problems take decades.
We don't have decades. They don't take decades.
I'm sorry. Cybersecurity problems are decades in the making. Whole of government is responsible, and it will take all of us to solve the issue and continue to work on them. My leadership in this particular, with OPM is one that instigated the improvements and changes that were recognized, that recognized the attack.
Yield back. I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for as much time as he wants.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Seymour, this data breach is particularly concerning because the individuals who were targeted were government employees and the suspected attackers are foreign entities. I'm concerned that this breach may pose a national security threat. According to a statement from OPM, the personal information of approximately 4 million current and former federal employees was compromised in this breach. What can you tell us about the type of personal information that was compromised in this breach?
Thank you for the question, sir. The type of information involved in the personnel records breach includes typical information about job assignments, some performance ratings, not evaluations, but performance ratings, as well as training records for our personnel. The information involved in the background investigations incident involves SF-86 data, as well as clearance adjudication information.
So, Social Security numbers?
Yes, sir. Social Security number, date of birth, place of birth, typical PII that would be in those types of files.
Ms. Seymour, it was reported on Friday that in addition to this breach, hackers had breached highly sensitive information gathered in background investigations of current and former federal employees. Is that true?
Yes, sir, that is.
Do you know how far back that goes?
No, sir, I don't. These are, the issue is that these are longitudinal records, so they span an employee's career, and so I do not know what the oldest record is.
So it's possible that somebody could be working for the federal government for 30 years and that their information over that 30 years could have been breached here?
Yes, sir. These records do span an employee's career.
So what can you tell us about the type of information that may have been compromised in the second breach?
I believe that that would be a discussion that would be better had in our classified session this afternoon, sir.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you. Dr. Osmond, these suspected cyber spies from a foreign state went after sensitive, detailed information about federal employees. What could they do with this information? I'm talking to you, yes.
Ranking Member, I'm going to have to defer that question to the intelligence community, who will be a participant in our classified briefing this afternoon at 1 o'clock.
All right. Experts advise taking steps to mitigate damage from cyber spying attacks by using tools such as data segmentation, data masking, and encryption. And Chairman asked about encryption. I know from past OPM testimony before the committee that OPM has been a leader in deploying those tools. Now, Ms. Seymour, it's kind of hard to understand how cyber spies could have accessed more than 4 million records if you were using those tools to the fullest. And Ms. Archuleta had a lot of faith and confidence in you, as the chairman just stated. Can you explain what happened?
Thank you, Mr. Cummings, for the question. A lot of our systems are aged, and implementing some of these tools take time, and some of them we cannot even implement in our current environment. That is why, under Director Archuleta's leadership, we have launched a new program where we are building a new environment, a new architecture, a modern architecture that allows us to implement additional security features. We have, in our legacy environment, we have installed numerous technologies, and that is how we discovered this breach in the first place. So we are shoring up what we have today, and then we are building for the future so that we can become more secure and provide these types of protections to our data and our systems.
Well, in the meantime, if we're going to collect and if we're going to store sensitive personal information, we must make it unusable to our adversaries that their cyber spies are able to steal it. Would you agree? OPM, as well as American businesses, have got to do a better job of protecting sensitive information. Would you agree? Ma'am?
Yes, sir.
Now, Ms. Seymour, do you have the tools now to do that? Are you trying to tell us you don't?
OPM has procured the tools, both for encryption of its databases, and we are in the process of implying those tools within our environment, but there are some of our legacy systems that may not be capable of accepting those types of encryption in the environment that they exist in today. And that is why it's important for us to focus very aggressively, very proactively on building out that new architecture so that in the future we will be able to implement those tools for all of our databases.
Now, when you talk about the future, I mean, when you're talking about 3 months, 3 years?
We began our program after the March 2014 incident. We worked very closely with our interagency partners to devise a very aggressive and very comprehensive plan. We have been implementing that plan since then. We are delivering what we call our shell, which is the new architecture. We are delivering that this fall, and we will begin looking at our business systems applications and how we can migrate those into the new architecture.
Ms. Seymour, this is the question. We're collecting data right now. There are people's data that's out there, and I'm talking about in the meantime. Where are we? In other words, I know you're trying to do some things, but that doesn't make federal employees feel pretty good. It doesn't make me feel good. So tell me more. Are you saying that we are just vulnerable and we don't know when we're going to be able to deploy the types of systems that you just talked about? I mean,
no, sir. We've done a number of things.
I'm not talking about what you've done. I'm talking about, I mean, again, I'm talking about what's going on today.
That's exactly what I'm offering, sir.
All right.
We have implemented two-factor authentication for remote access to our network. That means that without a PIV card or some other type of device, that our users cannot log into our network remotely. We have implemented additional firewalls in our network. We have tightened the settings of those firewalls. We have reduced the number of privileged users in our account, and we have even further restricted the access privileges that those users have. We have made a number of other steps to increase the security of our existing network. We began that work back last March, and it has continued. And we continue to work with DHS and our agency partners to test those systems and make sure that they are working appropriately.
Now, Mr. Esser, the Office of Inspector General conducted an audit in 2014, the chairman was talking about this, of OPM's information security programs and found several weaknesses. Can you briefly identify what those weaknesses were that you found?
Yes, sir. The most critical weaknesses that we identified in our FISMA report from 2014 were the continued information security governance problems that have existed since 2007, the decentralization of the controls over systems. That, however, is an area that is certainly close to being improved to a full extent. Another area of weaknesses were the security assessments and authorization, which is each system that OPM owns should go under an assessment every 3 years and be authorized for usage. We identified 11 systems at the end of 2014 that had not been authorized, that were due to be authorized. The technical security controls was another big area that we identified. While OPM has implemented a number of strong tools and is improving in that area, our concern is that some of those tools were not being used properly and that they do not have a complete and accurate inventory of databases and servers that those tools should be applied against.
So if you, the chairman asked Josh Jalala a question of how she thought she'd done. I mean, based upon that, what grade would you give?
I don't know that I can give a grade.
So of all the things that you just stated, there were certain things that were not done. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Did any of them lead to this breach? The things that were not done?
I don't know the exact details of how this breach occurred, so I really can't answer that question. Certainly, there's a lot of weaknesses at OPM that they're in the process of trying to address.
And last but not least, do you have a silver bullet to address this issue, sir?
No, sir, I do not. There is very sophisticated attackers out there, and there's no one silver bullet, I think, that can be applied that will prevent these types of things from happening.
Now, you heard me ask Ms. Seymour about the fact that we're constantly collecting information, and it seems as if we're just vulnerable. Is that? I mean, and that there's certain areas that we may not be able to defend ourselves in. Is that an accurate statement?
Certainly, there's a lot of things that can be done to make our systems more secure. Is there something that can be done to make them impenetrable? Not that I'm aware of.
Well, thank you very much.
Now I recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you know, I appreciate the witnesses being here. I mean, this morning we've certainly heard that there's no silver bullet, and I don't think we expected the answer to be yes, there's a silver bullet. We are concerned that knowing what's been going on, having clear evidence that hackers have been attempting for quite some time, and then at least those of us here who trust on agencies and people like yourselves who know the issues, that some more efforts could have been successful in stopping the most recent attacks. We've heard today that networks aren't compartmentalized, segmented, in certain cases encrypted, that with the recent attacks, exterior perimeter has been breached. The attacker often remains undetected for months. That's concerning. As a result of that, able to exploit vulnerabilities within the networks without passing through, and this is most concerning to me, additional inspection or security measures. And so, Mr. Scott, as I understand, in the private sectors, there have been shifts toward zero trust model, ultimately given OMB's role in setting metrics for agencies. My question is, can you tell us what OMB is doing to set IT security metrics to limit the number of workloads, application tiers to the networks?
Thank you for the question. I think there's a number of things that I would point to in addition to the measures that you just talked about. The first one is to share across the federal government not only the lessons learned from OPM, but what we see from other attacks, whether successful or not, private and public, and make sure that all agencies are up to speed with the latest information on the methods of attack, the tools that are used, and so on.
That's a weakness right now, is what you're telling me, that's not happening?
It has been historically the ability for the government and the private sector to share information has been a hindrance in our ability to thwart these things. But I'll say that the specific measure that you mentioned, the segmentation and zero trust, is something that is more easily applied to very modern architectures. It's not as easily applied to some of the oldest and old legacy systems that we have. And I think that's going to be a challenge for all agencies where the architecture itself just doesn't lend itself to the application of certain technologies. The best answer, I think, in terms of what we have and where we go is a model that we're promoting and encouraging across the agencies, which is defense in depth. It's a number of different measures so that if one thing doesn't work, you have the next layer that helps. And if that doesn't work, you have the next layer. And zero trust is applicable in some of those environments, and frankly is very difficult or impossible to apply.
How far are we from that?
I would say years and years comprehensively.
Whoa.
But one of the things that we're working on right now is prioritizing based on the highest value assets that the federal government has, so that we're going after the most valuable stuff first and make sure that's protected the best way we can.
Ms. Seymour, with the millions of current and former federal employees, a lot of them in my district that sign on to do the work that we give to them. We appreciate the work. It's not something they make up. We ask them to do the federal jobs that the agencies, the departments that they work under have been asked to do. They don't expect that their life will be compromised, their history will be compromised, their records will be compromised. When did OPM begin letting victims know of the breach and the risk to their identities?
Thank you for your question, sir. I, too, am a federal employee and
Right.
very concerned about this matter. It is grave and serious, so I appreciate that. We began notifying personnel on June 8th, and we'll continue to make those notifications through June 19th. That is for the personnel records security incident that we have. We have not yet been able to do the analysis of the data that's involved with the background investigations incident. That is ongoing, and as soon as we can narrow the data that is involved in that incident, we will make appropriate notifications for that one as well.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the chairman and ranking member for calling this hearing, and all of our panelists for your public service. As one who represents the city that was attacked by 9/11, we lost thousands on that day, and thousands more are still dying from health-related causes from that fateful day. But I consider this attack, I call it an attack on our country, a far more serious one to the national security of our country. And I would like to ask Mr. Osmond from Homeland Security, would you characterize this as a large-scale cyber spying effort? That's what it sounds like to me. What is it?
I think to speak to whether or not this was a spying effort, we would have to talk to any understanding of who the adversaries were and what their intent was, and I think that's a conversation better reserved for a couple of hours.
Do you believe it is a coordinated effort? They appear to be attacking health records, employment records, friendship, family, whole background. It seems to be a large sphere of information, not only from the government, but private contractors, individuals. And sometimes it appears targeted towards Americans who may be serving overseas in sensitive positions. But would you consider this a coordinated effort? Can you answer that, or is that classified?
Thank you, Representative. I would defer that question to the classified
thank
briefing,
you.
but what I would say, if you're willing, is to note that
I'll be at the 1 o'clock briefing. Thank you. Now I want to refer to this article, and I'd like to place it in the record. I think it's an important one. It came from ABC News. And it reports, if I could put it in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And it reports that they seem to be looking at and gathering information on an SF-18 form, which is a standard Form 18, which is required for any employee seeking classified security clearances. So that would be people in important positions in our government. And I won't ask any questions on it. I'll just wait till later at this classified briefing, but I am extremely disturbed. This article also points out that it's not only individuals that they're going after. They're going after contractors and those that serve the government. And it mentions in other reports Lockheed Martin, where they went after their secure ID program. Is that true, Mr. Osmond?
I can't speak to whether any adversaries have gone after specific private sector companies.
Okay, all right, then we won't get into that. But other press reports said that there was Northrop Grumman, L3, that they were hit by cyber attacks, and other government contractors. Now, one that probably hit Congress is one in 2013 where the FBI warned that a group called Anonymous hacked into the U.S. Army, Department of Energy, Department of Health and Human Services, and many agencies by exploiting a weakness in Adobe systems. Now, I have the Adobe system in my office, so that means they could have hacked into my office and probably every other congressional office. And then they talk about going into health care. They go into the Blue Cross Blue Shield system of all the federal employees. So it seems like they want a comprehensive package on certain millions of Americans, many of whom are serving our country, I would say at negotiating tables in Commerce, State Department, probably Defense, and every other aspect of American life in the world economy. But Mr. Scott, you have been before this committee before, and you announced you were going to review the agency's cybersecurity programs to identify risks and implement gaps. And I wonder if you could report on what you learned from this review and any specific changes in cybersecurity policies, procedures, or guidance, if you can report on that, or that may be classified too. But anything you can share with us on what you've been doing to act to build some firewalls?
Sure. Well, thank you for the question. So we're conducting regular cyberstat reviews with each of the agencies. And it's along the key lines of many of the topics we've talked about here. Two-factor, patching, minimizing the number of system administrators, all of the, I'll call it hygiene factors that we think lead to good cybersecurity.
My time has expired, but anything you want to give to the committee in writing, we'd appreciate it.
We'd
Thank
be
you.
happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank the gentlewoman. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Archuleta, let me come to you. You've been in your current position since 2013, is that correct? Your mic.
I was sworn in November 2013.
So in 2013, you, according to your testimony, made cyber the highest priority. I think that's how you opened up your testimony, that the security of federal employees was your highest priority. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. So help me reconcile then, if it is your highest priority, how, when the most recent IG's report that came out that took security from being a material weakness, is how it was characterized before you got there, to significant deficiency, how would you reconcile highest priority and significant deficiency as being one and the same?
Thank you for your question. As as I mentioned earlier, one of the first things that we did, or I did for OPM, was to develop within 100 days an IT strategic plan. And the issues that the IG just mentioned in terms of IT governance and IT leadership, as well as IT architecture, IT agility, IT data, and IT cybersecurity were all strong components of this IT plan. And the IG recognized those steps and the strategic plan that we developed.
But he did recognize it. I only have 5 minutes, so I can't let you just ramble on with all of these things. So let me ask you, how, if he recognized that, would he still characterize it as significant deficiencies?
As we were instituting the improvements that we were making, he was also at the same time conducting his audit. His audit was conducted in the summer of 2014 when we were beginning to implement our strategic plan, and the IG has continued to work with us, and we've taken his recommendations very seriously.
You have taken them seriously, so have you implemented all of them? Yes or no? Just yes or no?
We have implemented many of them, and are in the process of
have you
implemented
all of those?
As I said, sir, I have implemented many of them and continue to work.
So you will implement all of them?
We're looking at each of those recommendations very seriously.
Not looking. Will you implement? Can you assure the federal workers that you're going to implement all the recommendations that the IG recommended to you? Yes or no?
We are working very closely with the IG to...
I will take that as a no. All right, so let me go on further then, because I'm very concerned that here we have not even notified most of the federal employees that we've known about it. They continue to not be notified. And yet here you are saying that you have different priorities, because when Chairman Chaffetz asked you about why did you not shut it down, you said, well, OPM has a number of other responsibilities. Is that correct? That was your answer to Chairman Chaffetz.
We house a variety of data, not just data on employee personnel files, but we also house healthcare data. We employ other records, and the results...
So what you're saying, it was better that you supplied that and put federal workers at risk versus making it, according to your words, the highest priority to make sure that the information was not compromised. If it's your highest priority, why didn't you shut it down like Mr. Chaffetz asked and like was recommended? Why didn't you shut it down?
In our opinion, we were not able to shut it down in view of all of the responsibilities we hold at OPM. We do take seriously...
So in your opinion, protecting federal workers then could not have been your highest priority, because there were competing, I guess, priorities, and you said it was better that you continued on with the others versus protecting the federal workforce.
As I said, the recommendations that the IG gave to us are ones that we take very seriously, sir. I don't want to characterize that we didn't. That in fact we did take.
There's a quote
ongoing conversation.
Okay, let me. There's a quote that says, what we occasionally have to look at, no matter how beautiful the strategy, we have to occasionally look at the results. And the results here are pretty profound, that we've got security risk all over. And I would encourage you to take it a little bit more serious and indeed make it your highest priority. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our panel for your help. I want to associate myself with the remarks of the ranking member and the chairman today, which doesn't always happen.
Duly noted.
I would like to ask unanimous consent, if I might enter into the record the remarks of Colleen M. Kelly, National President of the National Treasury Employees Association, National Treasury Employees Union, and also a letter from J. David Cox, who's the President of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
Without objection, so ordered.
I want to also I want to read the first 3 paragraphs. This is a letter from the President of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO, J. David Cox, to the Honorable Catherine Archuleta. It says, Dear Honorable Archuleta, I'm writing in reference to the data breach announced by the Office of Personnel Management. In the days since the breach was announced, and this is dated last week, in the days since the breach was announced, very little substantive information has been shared with us, despite the fact that we represent more than 670,000 federal employees in departments and agencies throughout the executive branch. OPM has attempted to justify the withholding of information on the breach by claiming that the ongoing criminal investigation restricts your ability to inform us of exactly what happened, what vulnerabilities were exploited, who was responsible for the breach, and how damage to affected individuals might be repaired and compensated. Based on sketchy information that OPM has provided, we believe that the central personnel data file was the targeted database, and that the hackers are now in possession of all personnel data for every federal employee, every federal retiree, and up to 1 million former federal employees. We believe the hackers have every affected person's Social Security number, military record, veteran status, address, birth date, job and pay history, health insurance, life insurance, email, pension information, age, gender, race, union status, and a lot more. Worst of all, we believe the Social Security numbers were not encrypted, a basic cybersecurity failure that is absolutely indefensible and outrageous. So, Ms. Archuleta, were the Social Security numbers, were they encrypted?
OPM is in the process of...
Ms. Archuleta, is that I don't know?
I don't believe that
Can we just stick to a yes or no? Because you really, you know what, this is one of those hearings where I think I am going to know less coming out of this hearing than I did when I walked in, because of the obfuscation and the dancing around that we're all doing here. Matter of fact, I wish that you were as strenuous and hardworking at keeping information out of the hands of hackers as you are keeping information out of the hands of Congress and federal employees. It's ironic. You're doing a great job stonewalling us, but hackers not so much. So, were the Social Security numbers, were they encrypted? Yes or no?
No, they were not encrypted.
There you go. There you go. Now we're getting somewhere. That's pretty basic, though. That's pretty basic. Encrypting Social Security numbers. So all this happy talk about these complex systems we're going to come up with, you're not even encrypting people's Social Security numbers. That's a shame. Let me ask you about this Standard Form 86. Now, for those of you who, obviously you know that Standard Form 86 is what we require employees to fill out if they're going to receive security clearance. So these are people who will have sensitive information. And we drill down on these folks. This is a copy of the application. It's online if people want to look at it. It's 127 pages online. And we ask them everything. What kind of underwear they wear, you know, what kind of toothpaste I mean, it's a deep dive. And that's for a good reason, right? Because we want to know when people get security clearance that they are trustworthy, that there's information here if you've ever been arrested, your financial information is in here. You know, there's a lot of information in this form. They hacked this. They hacked this. They got this information. on Standard Form 86. So they know all of these employees and everything about them that we asked them in the Standard Form 86. Is that right, Ms. Seymour?
I believe that's a discussion that would best be held till this afternoon, sir.
That'd probably be a yes. Like I say, you know, I think you got to be honest with your employees, you know, and I think that we need to, in order to protect them, we need to let them know what's going on, because they have the email addresses in here as well, several, you know, your first, your second, your third email address, and all that information is out there. So we need to be a little bit more, not a little bit more, we need to be more forthcoming with our own employees. These are people who work for us, and a lot of them deserve a lot more protection than they're getting right now from the United States government and for the Office of Personnel Management. I see my time has expired. I appreciate the indulgence of the chairman, and I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And many of us are often uncomfortable asking questions in this type of setting, because obviously we don't want to ask questions, the answers to which should be kept confidential. So I encourage you in advance, if I ask you something that we should talk about in a different setting, that is an acceptable answer. But I sort of feel like Mr. Lynch in that I don't know if I get my hands around exactly what we're learning. So let me start with this. I'm going to follow up on one question that Mr. Meadows asked of Ms. Archuleta, which is he asked you if you were going to implement all of the IG's recommendations. You said you were working with the IG, whether or not there was a yes or no answer. I agree with Mr. Meadows, probably closer to no, so let me address it like this. Can you name for me some of the IG recommendations that you are pushing back against or that you're not interested in implementing?
I don't have the specific recommendations in front of me, and I would be very glad to come back and talk about that.
Okay.
What I would like to say, sir, is that as we look at the recommendations by the IG, we work with him so that he can fully understand where we have moved in our security efforts, and also to understand his observations. And that's the normal audit process, and we continue to go through that with him and update him on a regular basis.
And we get IGs in here all the time, and that makes perfect sense. What bugs me, Mrs. Archuleta, is that back in the end of 2014, they recommended, in fact, it was their third recommendation, that all active systems in OPM's inventory have a complete and current authorization. Your response to that closed at saying that we agree that it's important to maintain up-to-date and valid ATOs for all systems, but we do not believe that this condition rises to the level of material weakness, end quote. Do you believe that your opinion on that has changed since November of 2014, Ms. Archuleta?
I appreciate all of the information and the recommendations that the IG has given us, and we will continue to work with him.
Do you still believe now, knowing what you know now, that that condition did not rise to the level of material weakness?
Sir, we are working with a legacy system, and as the recommendations that he has made to us, we are working through those to the best of our ability.
That's what frightens me, Mrs. Archuleta, that this is the best of your ability. Let me see if I can just get some summary information here as I go back and try and explain to folks back home. I've heard that it was just people in the executive branch. I open this to anybody who might be able to answer this in a very brief. Are we still saying that the only people whose data was exposed were folks who worked within the executive branch of government?
Sir, this is an ongoing investigation, and as we uncover new information, we are happy to share it with you.
Right.
We are not necessarily restricted to the executive branch, because there are people who work in the executive branch today who worked in the legislative branch.
And I got the notice, Ms. Seymour. That's not my. I got the notice, and it says if you work in the executive branch or you've ever worked in the executive branch, then there's a chance they got your data. But if you've never worked for the executive branch, then you don't have to worry. Are you still comfortable with that statement?
No, sir. This is an ongoing investigation, and we are learning new facts every day.
And that's a fair answer. Now, the original number we heard publicly was 4 million. Is it still 4 million? I've heard 14 today a couple times. What is the current estimate of the number of current or previous employees who've been affected?
Approximately 4 million is the number that we are making notifications of today. We continue to investigate, especially in the background investigations incident, so that we can understand that data and begin to make notifications there as well.
All right, I've got a question. I don't think it's been asked yet. I think it's for Mr. Osment or whoever else understands the IT systems. When we used to do this in the private sector, we used to differentiate between someone who had hacked into our system and someone who actually stole something from us, because there's two levels of involvement there. So I guess my question to you, Mr. Osment, is have you been able yet to make the distinction between just where the hackers were and they had access and things were exposed, and where possibly they actually downloaded data?
Thank you, Representative. That is an important distinction and one that we spend a lot of our investigative time examining. For the personnel records, the approximately 4.2 million records, the incident response team led by DHS but with interagency partners has concluded with a high probability that that data was exfiltrated, meaning that it was removed from the network by the adversary who took it. And we're continuing to investigate the information related
Very
to
briefly, Mr. Osment, I appreciate that. I don't mean to cut you off, and I wish we had more time to do that. Let me ask this one question. I heard about the data. I heard Mr. Lynch ask about the Social Security numbers. It sounds like that might have been exfiltrated. Health data. Why do we collect health data on our employees? Ms. Archuleta, if I come to work for you, for the government, do I give you my health records?
Not your health records, but the information regarding your health carrier is the information that we receive and who you would include in the, no, not your health.
So it's not specific medications, it's not specific conditions, it's just who my health insurance company is.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, what's so jarring about this hearing is that sort of in bloodless and bureaucratic language, we're talking about the compromise of information of fellow Americans, and from the federal employee point of view, the most catastrophic compromise of personal information in the history of this country. Social Security records. Ms. Archuleta, you mentioned that not health information, but health carrier. That's a roadmap to other information hackers can get. Security clearances. Security clearances are deeply personal and often involve, do they not, Ms. Seymour, unconfirmed negative information, even rumors. I think so-and-so has a drinking problem. That gets in that report even if it's not confirmed. Is that not correct?
Sir, I'm not a federal investigator, and I'm not familiar with all of the precise data that's in those.
Yeah, well, let me confirm for you. It was a rhetorical question, really. It is correct. It is from, how do we protect our employees? Dr. Osment, when I heard your testimony, it almost sounded like you were saying that the good news here is we detected the hack. But the object here isn't effective detection, though that's part of the process. It is prevention and preemption to protect our citizens, including federal employees. You talked about Einstein, and you championed its merits. Was Einstein in place at OPM when this hack occurred?
Sir, I share your deep concern about the loss of this information and agree that that is a terrible outcome.
A terrible outcome.
Absolutely. As a federal employee whose information is itself a part of this database, I feel...
It might even be personally devastating, Dr. Osment, not just a terrible outcome.
That is correct, sir. What I would tell you on this was that Einstein was critical in this incident. As OPM implemented their new security measures and detected the breach.
Was Einstein in place at the time of this breach?
Einstein 1 and 2 have been in place at OPM. Einstein 3 is not yet available for OPM to take.
I've only got 2 minutes. I want to understand your answer. So did it successfully detect a breach had occurred?
It did not detect the breach that OPM caught on their own networks because just as the cyber threat information sharing legislation we are focused on acknowledges, you first have to have the threat information. Einstein 1, once we had that threat information, we used Einstein 1 and 2 to detect a separate breach that we were then able to work.
I'm sure every federal employee who had his or her information compromised is comforted by your answer, Dr. Osment. Ms. Archuleta, what was the time gap between discovering there had been a breach and the actual breach itself?
We discovered the breach in April of
This year.
Of 2015.
And when did the breach occur?
We suspected it happened earlier in 2014.
So sometime late last year?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So they, whoever were the hackers, presumably an agency of the Chinese government, according to published reports confirmed by U.S. officials. It's not a classified piece of information. The details of it may be, but our government, I believe, has confirmed without attribution in public records that it was a systematic effort by the People's Liberation Army, which has been notorious for hacking all over the West, that got its hands on this data. So they had 4 months in which to do something with this data. Is that correct? Maybe 5?
I can't make a comment on the on attribution.
I didn't ask you to. I just asked whether they had 4 or 5 months to do something with this data.
The period between when discovery of the time that we believe the breach occurred and our discovery, yes.
All right. I'm going to, real quickly, if the chairman allows, to Mr. Scott, one last question. The head of CERT, the director of CERT, says if agency implemented 3 steps, we could prevent about 85% of breaches. And I'm going to hold in abeyance new investments in new technology because Ms. Seymour talks about legacy systems. And I had always hoped that the Chinese didn't know how to hack into COBOL. But that's a different matter. Okay, the 3 things are minimize administrative privileges, 2, utilize application whitelisting, and 3, continuously patch software, which interestingly does not go on. Would you just comment, what's your take, professional take, on those 3 recommendations?
I think those recommendations are great, and there's a number of other things as well, some of which I've talked about today. I think the one point I would make is there's no one measure that you could say that's going to prevent all attacks or even prevent a attack. It's really defense in depth is your best measure, and that's what we're really looking at emphasizing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I'll recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I certainly agree with my colleague from Virginia in his description. This is a catastrophic compromise. Ms. Archuleta, it appears that OPM did not follow the very basic cybersecurity best practices, specifically such as network segmentation and encryption of sensitive data. Should the data have been encrypted? Can you address that?
That the data was not encrypted, and as Dr. Osmond has indicated, encryption may not have been a valuable tool in this particular breach. As I said earlier, we are working closely to determine what sorts of additional tools we can put into our system to prevent further breaches.
You used your word, you said may not have been, but that didn't answer the question, should it have been encrypted, and could that have been another line of defense?
I would turn to my colleagues from DHS to determine the use of encryption, but I will say that it was not encrypted at the time of the breach.
Sure.
I would note that if an adversary has the credentials of a user on the network, then they can access data even if it's encrypted, just as the users on the network have to access data, and that did occur in this case. So encryption in this instance would not have protected this data.
And I want to delve a little further than just a moment, but let me ask this, Ms. Archuleta, what consequences should CIOs face for failing to meet such a baseline of cybersecurity standard on their networks? May I hear your thoughts on that?
I believe that that the CIO is responsible for the implementation of a solid plan, and I believe that my CIO has been doing that. We are working with a legacy system that is decades old, and we are using all of our financial and human resources to improve that system. This is an effort, cybersecurity is a government-wide effort, and we all must work together to improve the systems that we have government-wide.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the American people are content with the pace of how we are all working together. I want to speak a little bit to Einstein. I've heard several different comments today regarding it. My question is, even if Einstein is a necessary component to effectively defending the system, I believe the private sector is really already moving on this kind of technology. Is that a fair question? And what is the DHS doing to keep pace with its attackers? Dr. Osment?
Einstein is absolutely a necessary but not sufficient tool for protecting department and agency networks. As Mr. Scott has noted several times, we need a defense-in-depth strategy. We are supplementing Einstein with continuous diagnostics and mitigations at the agencies. And we are also looking with Einstein at taking what is currently a signature-focused system and adding capabilities to let it detect previously unknown intrusions. But as you do that, you also receive more false positives. In other words, you receive more indications that an intrusion occurred even if it did not occur. So we have to do that carefully so we are not overwhelmed by essentially bad data.
Sure. And it seems to be that you're more excited or more confident in the Einstein, 3A version? Is that going to be more solid as far as keeping the attackers out?
Einstein 3A will be a significant step forward. It uses classified information and is modeled on a similar Department of Defense program. It is still a signature-based program, but it will rely upon classified information obtained from the intelligence community to help us detect adversaries and block them from intrusion.
And I even heard you earlier say something about how even that system needs to be supplemented with others. Is that correct?
That is correct. Again, no single system here will solve this problem.
But and this lies my problem, because even on the DHS own website, when talking about Einstein 3, and I quote, it says it prevents malicious traffic from harming networks. Now, if that's not all-inclusive, should not we be understanding that before today's hearing? I mean, why aren't we just now getting this information that this may not be enough to prevent such a, as we said earlier, catastrophic compromise?
I can't speak to the webpage you're referring to, but I can say that we have been very consistent, and I have been very consistent in all my interactions with Congress to highlight that we do need a defense-in-depth strategy and that no one tool will solve all of our problems.
Who is responsible for posting this information on the website of the DHS?
We'll look into that and get back to you, sir, and make updates as necessary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Cartwright, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank the chairman and the ranking member for calling this hearing. Director Archuleta, I know there have been much bigger data breaches than this one, but I am concerned, and I share the sentiments of Mr. Connolly from Virginia. This is extremely troubling. And we're talking about 4 million plus federal workers, people who dedicate their entire careers, indeed their entire lives, to our country, and now their personal information has been compromised through absolutely no fault of their own. If I understand your testimony, the personal information of about 4 million current and former employees was potentially compromised. And I want to ask you, as your investigation continues, do you believe that that number is going to be bigger than 4 million?
Thank you for your question. In my opening statement, I described two incidences. The first incident...
no, it's a yes or no question, or I don't know.
Yeah, no, because the two incidents, the first incident is 4.2 million, and an ongoing investigation led us to understand that the federal investigative
you know what I mean when I say it's a yes or no question, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you think it could be more than 4.2 million?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, Ms. Seymour, let me turn to you for some more detailed responses. Your IT professionals discovered the breach in April, and as Mr. Connolly mentioned, they believe the hack may have begun back in December. Am I correct in that?
Yes, sir. It began in 2014.
And now something else happened in December of 2014. OPM's contractor, Keypoint, revealed that it was targeted in an earlier cyber attack, And now this is the contractor that does the majority of your agency's background check investigations. Am I correct in that?
They do a number of our background investigations, sir. I'm not sure of the numbers.
And in that case, the attack against Keypoint was successful. Personal information was, in fact, compromised, correct?
Yes, sir.
On Friday, ABC News issued a report entitled, quote, Fed's Eye Link to Private Contractor in Massive Government Hack. This article says this: the hackers who recently launched a massive cyber attack on the U.S. government, exposing sensitive information of millions of federal workers and millions of others, may have used information stolen from a private government contractor to break into federal systems. The article goes on. The hackers entered the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM's computer systems after first gaining access last year to the systems of Keypoint Government Solutions. It continues. Authorities, meanwhile, believe hackers were able to extract electronic credentials or other information from within Keypoint systems and somehow use them to help unlock OPM systems, according to sources. The hackers then rummaged through separate segments of OPM systems, potentially compromising personal information of not only the 4 million current and former federal employees. Ms. Seymour, I know we're having our classified briefing later, and I thank you for coming to that, but can you comment on these reports? Did these hackers actually get what they wanted in the previous attack against OPM's contractor, Keypoint, so they could then go after OPM itself?
I believe that's a discussion that we should have in a classified setting, sir.
Fair enough. Now, we know that OPM's other contractor, USIS, was also breached last year, and that its information was also compromised. Can you tell us if those hackers got information in the USIS breach that they were then able to use in the attack against OPM?
Again, that's a discussion we should have later, sir.
I understand. I certainly don't want you to disclose classified information here. But let me close by asking a final question to the whole panel, and I'll let each of you answer. Federal agencies and private companies are only as strong as their weakest link. Last year we saw breaches of 2 contractors, Keypoint and USIS. Now we have reports that these hackers are getting into OPM information because of what they learned in those hacks. Agencies have leverage over their contractors using the provisions in their contracts and the billions of taxpayer dollars that they pay out to the company. So I want to ask each of you, how can agencies use that leverage to improve cybersecurity practices of contractors so that they do a better job of safeguarding the information that they're entrusted with? Go ahead, right on down the line. Starting with you, Ms. Archuleta.
What we can do with the contractors that we engage is to make sure that they have the security systems that match the federal government's, and that they're using the same types of systems. In addition, with I want to be sure that I understand your question. The contractors that we employ as individuals or as companies?
The contractors as companies.
That in our contracts with with the companies, we are now working to make sure that they are adhering to the same standards that we have in federal government as outlined in our law, in our rules.
Dr. Osment.
Representative, DHS, for its own contract, as one example, has been working to build in additional cybersecurity requirements. I would also point you to the FedRAMP effort, government-wide effort to establish a baseline of cybersecurity requirements for cloud contractors to the government.
Mr. Scott?
Yes, I think as my colleague and Ann Rung and I testified last week, we also are strengthening the federal contract procurement language and creating contract language that any agency can use as a part of their standard contracts.
Thank you. Ms. Burns?
I think it is about beefing up the security clauses in all contracts so that they cover the full extent of what we need, and then doing the monitoring and follow-up that you need to do to ensure that the contractors are adhering to those clauses of the contract.
Right. Ms. Seymour?
I agree with everything that my colleagues have put forth, but I will add that site inspections are also important, and those are some of the things that we do at OPM with our contractors, as well as continuous monitoring. Looking at a system every third year is not ample. That is not a best practice, and we need to move more towards looking at different security controls at different intervals of time. The other option that we do use is our IG also does inspections of our contractor companies.
Mr. Esser?
I agree with what the other witnesses stated, and like Ms. Seymour just said, we as the IG go out and we do audits of contractors, health insurance companies, the background investigation companies as well. So, we can be used and see ourselves in that role.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your indulgence. I also want to note that USIS was invited here today, but refused to come.
I appreciate the gentleman. You're almost 3 minutes over time. We have classified that we have to go to. We have members that still haven't offered. So
yield back.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I now recognize Mr. Russell from Oklahoma for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm baffled by all of this. Upon receipt or upon your appointment of the directorship of OPM, Director Archuleta had stated that she was committed to building an inclusive workforce. Who would have thought that that would have included our enemies? In this testimony here today, we heard statements that we did not encrypt because we thought they might be able to decrypt or decipher. That is just baffling to me. There was another statement I heard earlier today that said, had we not established the systems, we would have never have known about the breach. That's tantamount to saying if we had not watered our flower beds, we would have never seen the muddy footprints on the open windowsill. I mean, this is absolute negligence that puts the lives of Americans at risk and also foreign nationals that interact with these Americans. Of particular concern are the SF-86 forms, of which I'm very familiar with my background prior to coming to Congress. We had Sean Gallagher from Ars Technica who summed it up probably best. He said that this breach was a result of inertia, a lack of internal expertise, and a decade of neglect. Director Archuleta, why did you not shut down 11 of the 21 systems that had no security assessment and authorization?
Microphone. As I mentioned before, there are numerous priorities that go into employee safety and security, including making sure that our retirees receive their benefits or that our employees get paid. There's numerous considerations that we had to take.
Would one of those considerations be encrypting Social Security numbers? I mean, does it take a degree in IT and cybersecurity to encrypt Social Security numbers? I didn't think so. Did your cybersecurity strategic plan include leaving half of OPM's systems without protection when you formulated it? Was that part of the plan?
No, sir.
Then why was it not made a priority?
That the systems that the IG referred to in our plan is that those systems that he recommended that we shut down. He recommended that we shut them down because they were without authorization. All of our systems are now authorized and they are operating. I have to say that we are looking at systems that are very, very old. And we could take a look at encryption and other steps that could be taken, and certainly we are doing that. But as we look at this system, we're also having to deal with decades of
well, and I understand that, but I also understand there's an old saying we had in the military, poor is the workman who blames his tools. Missions can be accomplished even with what you have, and measures could have been done had this been made a priority. And what I see now is, why did OPM have no multi-factor authentication for users accessing the system from outside OPM? There was no multifaceted means. If they get into the system, they have free reign. Is that correct?
We have implemented multi-factor, as Ms. Seymour has mentioned multi-factor authentication with our remote users and are working now.
And when was that put in place, before or after the breach?
This began in January of 2015.
Okay, so stolen credentials could still be used to run free in the system, is that correct?
Prior to the time of the two-factor authentication, obviously it takes time to implement all of these tools. I am as distressed as you are about how long these systems have gone neglected when they have needed much resources, and it's in my administration that we've put those resources to it. We have to act quickly, and which we are doing, and we are also working with our partners across government. As I said before, cybersecurity is an issue that all of us address across the
Was a priority made to
federal
these
government.
outside systems that were most vulnerable that would allow this type of free run?
I'm sorry, sir, would you repeat the question?
Was a priority made to these outside accessing systems to OPM's database that once they get in them, they have a free reign, a free run?
Yes, it was a priority, sir, but as I said before, our legacy systems, it takes time.
It didn't take our enemies time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Archuleta, under your watch, last March, OPM database containing the crown jewels of American intelligence was breached. This year, the same exact database was breached. A third database containing over 4 million federal employees' data unencrypted was breached. The IGS said that at OPM, your technology systems are either materially weak or seriously deficient. And my question to you, it's just a very simple yes or no, is do you accept responsibility for what happened?
I accept responsibility for the administration of OPM and the important role of our IT systems in delivering the services. And I take very seriously my responsibilities in overseeing the improvements to a decades-old legacy system.
I don't really quite know what that means. I asked for a yes or no. I just really want to know, but that's fine. You've answered it. I'm going to reserve the balance of my time to make a statement. Having been a member of this oversight committee and as a computer science major, it's clear to me there is a high level of technological incompetence across many of our federal agencies. We've held hearings where it showed that federal agencies couldn't procure, implement, or deploy IT systems without massive bugs or massive cost overruns. We've held hearings where at least one federal agency, in this case the FBI, had a fundamental misunderstanding of technology where they continue to believe they can put in backdoors to encryption systems just for the good guys and not for hackers, which you cannot do. We had over 10 federal data system breaches last year. So there is a culture problem, and there is a problem of civilian leadership not understanding we're in a cyber war. Every day we're getting attacked in both the public and private sector. The U.S. military understands this. That's why they stood up an entire U.S. cyber command. But until our civilian leadership understands the gravity of this issue, we're going to continue having more data breaches. So let me give you some examples of this culture problem. You've heard today there was unencrypted Social Security numbers. That's just not acceptable. That is a failure of leadership. Look at the various IG reports over the years showing material weaknesses, and then look at last year's IG report, page 12. It says, as of November of last year, OPM had not yet done a risk assessment. That is ridiculous, especially since you knew in March your system was breached. That is a failure of leadership. And this goes beyond just OPM. Now, Mrs. Scott, you've only been here a few months, so you're going to get a pass on this. But I want to know, why was it that it wasn't until last Friday that agencies were ordered to put in basic cybersecurity measures? Why wasn't this done last year? Why wasn't this done years before? There was a failure of leadership above that of OPM. And when there is a culture problem, what have we done in the past? Well, especially in the area of national security, you can't have the view that, oh, this is legacy system, oh, we have these excuses. In national security, it's got to be zero tolerance. That's got to be your attitude. We can't have these breaches. The CIA can't go around saying, you know, every now and then our database of spies is going to get breached. That cannot happen. And when you have a culture problem, as we have had here, in the past when agencies have had this, leadership resigns or they're fired. At the DEA, leadership left. We had this happen at the Secret Service. We had this happen to Veterans Administration. And we as a government do that for two reasons. One is to send a signal that the status quo is not acceptable. We cannot continue to have this attitude where we make excuse after excuse. And you know, I've heard a lot of testimony today. The one word I haven't heard is the word sorry. When is OPM going to apologize to over 4 million federal employees that just had their personal data compromised? When is OPM going to apologize to the federal employees that had personally devastating information released through the SF-86 forms? I haven't heard that yet. And when there is a culture problem, we send a signal to others that the status quo is unacceptable and leadership has to resign. And the other reason we do that is because we want new leadership in that is more competent. And so I'm looking here today for a few good people to step forward, accept responsibility, and resign for the good of the nation. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Well said. Now recognize the chairman of the IT subcommittee, Mr. Hurd of Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my hope that every agency head and every CIO of these agencies are listening or watching or will read the testimony after this event, and that the first thing they do when they wake up tomorrow is pull out the GAO high-risk report that identifies, areas that they have problems with. They read their own IG report and start working to address those remediations. I've been at this job for 21 weeks, similar to Mr. Scott, and one of the things you hear from people, they're frustrated with their government. One, intentions are great. Mrs. Archuleta, you said that at the beginning that security of federal employees' data is paramount, and that's why, and that the data is paramount. I believe you believe that, right? But the execution has been horrific, right? Intentions are not enough. We have to have execution, and this is the thing that scares me. So my question, and let's start with you, Mrs. Archuleta, was did the hackers use a zero-day vulnerability to get into your network?
I think that would be better answered in a classified setting.
Well, if it was a zero-day vulnerability, I hope everybody has been notified of this zero-day, not only the government, but the private sector. We shouldn't be keeping secret a zero-day vulnerability. I know a little something about protecting secrets. I spent, almost my adult life in the CIA doing that. This is something that we need to get out. And if we haven't, because what I've read is that Einstein did detect the breach after the appropriate indicators of compromise was loaded into it. So my question is, how long did the federal government, did somebody have access to these indicators of compromise, and why did it take however much that time to get it into Einstein's system? And has that been promoted to every other agency that's using Einstein too?
Representative, OPM, once they implemented their security measure and discovered this breach, gave us the indicators of compromise immediately, and we loaded it into Einstein immediately. That is, we loaded it into Einstein 2 to both detect, and we looked back through history to see if any other traffic back in time had indicated a similar compromise. That is how we found an intrusion into OPM related to this incident that led to our discovery of the breach of the personal records. We also put into Einstein 3 so that agencies covered by Einstein 3 would be protected against a similar activity moving forward. And then we held a call with all the federal CIOs and disseminated these indicators to them and asked them to search their networks for these.
Has that been done?
That has been done.
Okay. So, Mrs. Seymour, you talk about legacy systems and the difficulty of protecting those. What are some of those legacy systems? And what programming software is used to develop those systems?
These are systems, sir, that have been around for going close to 25, 30 years. They are
So it was written by COBOL?
COBOL systems. One of the things I would like to offer is that, Director Archuleta and I actually were brought here to solve some of these problems.
Right. When did you start your job?
Decades. In December of 2013. These
And why did we wait until to implement two-factor authentication until after this hack?
We have not waited, sir. These are
So
issues
two-factor
that are
authentication was being
2
deployed
decades.
prior?
These are 2 decades in the making. We're not going to solve them all in 2 years. And if we continue
That's where I disagree with you, okay? Because, again, we got to stop thinking about this, that we have years to solve the problem. We don't. We should be thinking about this in days. Mrs. Archuleta, how much overtime have you signed off on since this hack of people that are dealing with the compromise?
My CIO team works 24/7.
Right. So if I walk into your building at 8 p.m. at night, there's going to be people drinking Red Bull, working furiously in order to solve this problem.
I'm very proud of the employees that are working on this issue, and they have been working 24/7.
Mr. Scott, you've inherited a mess, my man. And we're looking for you and whatever this committee can do to help you to ensure things like this doesn't happen, to ensure that these agencies and the CIOs of the agencies are implementing the recommendations of the IG, the recommendations of the GAO. We're here to do that, and we're to continue to drag people up here and answer these questions because that's our responsibility. And we have to say, I recognize that you're not going to stop anybody from penetrating your network, but how quickly can you identify them? Can you quarantine them, and can you kick them off the network? Those are the 3 metrics we should be using about the health of our systems, and we're woefully inadequate. I yield back the time I did not have. Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Mr. DeSantis of Florida is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Archuleta, in your testimony, you said, I think this is the direct quote, "We have now confirmed that any federal employee from across all branches of government whose organization submitted service history records to OPM may have been compromised even if their full personnel file is not stored on OPM system." What do you mean by service history?
There may be their careers, they may have been in a different position earlier than perhaps as they move around government. So it may be someone whose job would not be in this current job would not be in the system, but because of their service history, their information would be dated back and is for retirement purposes.
Okay, so potentially broader breach. I'll tell you, with SF-86, I remember filling that out when I was a young officer in the Navy, and it is by far the most intrusive form that I've ever filled out. It took me days. I had to go do research on myself to try to figure out. And it's not just that you're doing a lot of personal and sensitive data about the individual applicant. The SF-86 asks about family members. It asks about friends, spouse, relatives, where you've lived, who you knew when you lived in these different places. It also asks you to come clean about anything in your past life. And so to me, people have said that this is crown jewels material in terms of potential blackmail. And so this is a very, very serious breach. My question for Ms. Archuleta, were cabinet-level officials implicated in this breach?
Sir, this type of information would be better discussed in a classified setting.
Understood. What about people in the military and intelligence communities?
As I mentioned earlier, I believe that this is something that we could respond to in a classified setting.
Okay. And so you don't disagree with my characterization of the SF-86 and that the compromise, I mean, let's just say theoretical if you don't want to say what actually happened here, that is a major, major breach that will have ramifications for our country.
As I said, we'll discuss this with you in the classified setting.
Okay. SF-86 forms also require applicants to list foreign nationals with whom they are in close contact with. So that means China now has a list, for example, of Chinese citizens worldwide who are in close contact with American officials. They can and will obviously use that information for espionage purposes. So what are the security implications of that type of information falling into enemy hands? That could be for anybody.
Sir, that is a question that we will discuss in the hearing this afternoon.
Okay. Now, some reports say that not only were the hackers pursuing information on federal employees, but also password and encryption keys that could be used for trade secret theft and espionage. that, and I guess you'll have more to say that in a classified setting, but at least for this forum, can you say that that is a significant risk? That is not the type of information that we would want the enemy to have, and it can, in fact, be very damaging, correct?
Again, sir, we're going to defer discussion of that into the classified briefing.
Okay.
In 30 minutes.
Yeah, and I get that, and I will be there, and I will listen intently. But it really concerns me because this is really a treasure trove for our enemies potentially, and the fact that this system was hacked and we didn't even know about it for a long time, that is really, really troubling. And I think that the American people, I mean, if you ask people to want to serve in these sensitive positions and they think that by filling out these forms, they're actually going to put themselves or their family potentially at risk because the government's not competent enough to maintain that secretly, that is a major problem as well. So the information can be used against the country. Then you're also, I think, going to have a chilling effect on people wanting to get involved if we don't get a handle on this. So I look forward to hearing from the witnesses in a classified setting, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Seymour, does the employee exposure extend only to those who filled out Standard Form 86, or does it include others as well?
Our investigation is ongoing, sir.
Well, ma'am, apparently it does, because I have 2 employees who have never filled out a Standard Form 86, and they have a letter from you informing them of the possibility that their data may have been compromised. So I'll ask you again, and it's a yes or no, does it extend beyond the people who filled out an SF-86?
My answer to that is yes, sir. There are 2 incidents that we've come here to talk with you about
Why
today.
didn't you answer yes to start with?
Because you were talking about SF-86s, sir.
No, I made it clear. I asked you, did the exposure extend beyond those who filled out SF-86? And you said the investigation was ongoing. Apparently, you've investigated enough to send a letter to employees who didn't fill out those forms. So thank you for your yes answer. Is there, in your judgment, Ms. Archuleta, how likely is it that the hackers were able to access these personnel files through an employee account?
Sir, we'll be able to discuss that with you during the classified session.
Well, let me be a little bit more specific. Are you familiar with the Wall Street Journal article that indicated that it was possible that the breach occurred through personal email accounts because employees were using the federal system, and that early in 2011, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency noticed a significant uptick in infections and privacy spills, and they asked for a directive, or they put out a directive that federal employees could not use the federal system to access their personal emails. But the American Federation of Government Employees filed a grievance with a federal arbitrator claiming that that was something that needed to be bargained and needed to be part of the collective bargaining agreement. And the arbitrator dismissed ICE's security arguments in 75 words, claiming that the law didn't give the federal agencies exclusive discretion to manage the IT systems. So ICE wasn't able to shut that off. Do you have any comment on that?
No, sir. Again, those are issues that we'll be able to discuss in the classified hearing.
Well, it's being discussed in the Wall Street Journal. I think for now, since we need to head to the hearing, I will yield the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Esser, what are the risks that are associated with not having a valid system authorization?
Well, the risks are evident that not having a valid authorization essentially could be a symptom of weak controls over operating systems and applications and lead to things such as a breach.
Okay. With all the things that we're talking about here today, and Ms. Seymour, you were obviously fully aware of these risks, and OPM were aware of these risks?
Yes, sir. I was aware of these reports.
Okay. Now, this is, I kind of hate going back to this because it's come up several times already today, but still, I'm waiting for an answer. The Inspector General, of course, put out his report last November expressing great alarm, recommending that OPM consider shutting down the systems because of the risks that you knew about, Ms. Archuleta knew about. And yet these recommendations were ignored. Now I'm going to come back to you with this because, quite frankly, Ms. Archuleta has tried to dodge this question and dance all around it. I want to come straight up with you. Why were those recommendations not followed?
Two reasons, sir. One is an authorization to operate is merely the documentation of the security controls of a system and their effectiveness. That does not mean, simply because you don't have an authorization, that those tools don't exist. The other effort is, as the IG was doing its audit, we were taking all of those vulnerabilities into play. We had already developed a security plan that we were in the process of implementing, and the IG admits in their report that we were in the process of implementing many of those controls.
Did the plan that you were in process of implementing work? Obviously it didn't. Would shutting it down have worked?
The controls that we put in place allowed us to stop the remote access to our network, and they also allowed us to detect this activity that had occurred prior to the IG report.
But the vulnerability was still there, and your plan failed.
There are vulnerabilities in every system. What we do is a risk management process, sir, where we look at the vulnerabilities as well as the business that we must conduct.
Mr. Esser, let me come back to you. What currently, what are the consequences of owners of an OPM IT system? Currently, what are their what are the consequences now if they operate without a valid authorization?
There are essentially no consequences. We report that in our FISMA audits, but other than that, there are no official sanctions in place. It is something that it gets publicized, and that's the extent.
So it sounds to me like this thing's still not being taken seriously. There's no consequences for operating without authorization. Why in the world are we still operating without authorization, or is that occurring?
Sir, I have extended the authorizations that we had on these systems because we put a number of security controls in place in the environment. We have increased the effectiveness of the security around those systems.
But there's no consequences for not operating on a system with authorization. So how serious are you taking?
There are consequences.
What are they?
Those consequences are if you aren't doing the assessments, documenting them is, while that is evidence that those assessments have been done, the assessments themselves are more important. The scanning of the network, the tools
That's not
that
the
are put in place.
consequences. What are the consequences? You said there are consequences. I want to know what they are.
The consequences that we have are we report to OMB on a quarterly basis about the status of our security in our network.
All right, that doesn't sound like consequences. That sounds like just reporting that you're required to do anyways. There's no consequences involved in those reports. All right, Mr. Ezra, again, are there measures that need to be taken to get the whole thing up to the standard it ought to be? I mean, is there anything that you would recommend?
Yes, we do recommend that the CIO, the agency, take the steps that in a lot of cases they're beginning to take. The centralization of the IT governance is well along the way. What they also need to do is get a full inventory of the assets that they're responsible for protecting. And the Shell project that Ms. Seymour has alluded to earlier is also something that we support. We also have some concerns about the way the project has been started and managed. But overall, we support the idea behind the Shell project.
We appreciate the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentlewoman from New Mexico, Ms. Lujan Gershom, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for having this important hearing, and I want to thank the panel for taking this conversation and these questions so seriously. In New Mexico, we're one of the states that has one of the largest percentage or per capita federal employees in the country, in the top 5. So I've got 50,000 federal employees in my home state. And I am on their side by being incredibly concerned about this and, quite frankly, many other data breaches. The growing sophistication, frequency, and the impact on both public and private entities by cyber attacks continue to be a very serious threat. And in fact, 2 days after my first election, one of the key briefings by one of the national labs, which is in my district and Kirtland Air Force Base, is the continuing growing concern with cybersecurity issues and their aggressive responses, both to be proactive as much as they can be and to appropriately be reactive once you've got an identifiable breach. And given the data breach at OPM and at Home Depot and at Target, Anthem, it's clear to me that not only does the federal government have a role in protecting federal employees and the information that you have, but we have a role in working to protect the public in general from these serious and continuing series of cyber attacks. But I recognize also that this is a very challenging effort and that there's not a simple solution. If there was, we could stop this hacking altogether and have the magic bullet. And as much as I want you to do that, I don't want to minimize the fact that I recognize that that's more difficult to do than to say than do. No, it's easy to say. It's not so easy to do. But my concerns are growing given that even the best in the country are facing significant cyber attacks, including Kaspersky Lab, who we are relying on for innovative and appropriate technologies to implement. So, given that diatribe, and given all the questions that you've had about accountability, about the serious nature, here's really my question. Federal government is not known for being, and I mean no disrespect by this, but just stating the facts, it's not a proactive, very reactive body just by the nature of how large it is, how broad our mission is, and how we are dependent on whatever the resources are and the priorities are at any given time. Given that climate and the role to protect the general public and your role to protect federal employee information, what can you do that's different, that puts you in a position to be much more proactive, particularly given the nature of cyber attacks, and quite frankly, they're already hacked in as you're making the next modifications? Anyone on the panel? I mean, Mr. Scott, that may be a question that's primarily for you, but I'd be interested in anybody's response.
Sure. I can think of several things in the short run that, actually we already have underway. But probably long term, the biggest thing is to double down on replacing these legacy sort of old systems that we have. It's one of the central problems here is you have old stuff that just was not designed or built in an era when we had these kinds of threats. And it's, in some cases, very, very hard to sort of duct tape and Band-Aid things around these systems. It doesn't mean there's nothing you can do, but fundamentally it's, old architectures that need to be replaced, and security needs to be designed into the very fabric of the architecture of the hardware, the software, the networks, the applications. And the faster we can do that, the faster we're on a better road.
And given your role to do that in federal government, I'm not clear today what percentage of legacy systems and old architecture platforms that we're still operating under, and which departments are more at risk than others. What is the time frame for getting that done, and what's a reasonable course for this committee to take to make sure we've got accountability in federal government to move forward exactly in that effort?
Well, I think first thing is we're going to be very transparent with you in terms of the OMB reports, in terms of where we're at on that journey as we go through our work over the course of the year. Several of the members of this committee have said they're going to pay very close attention to that, which I encourage.
The gentleman will suspend. Our time is so tight to our 1 o'clock briefing. We would like a full and complete answer. There will be questions for the record, and we will continue to follow up. And I hope you understand.
Be happy to
we need to give time for Mr. Grothman from Wisconsin. He's now recognized for 5 minutes.
Right. I'm glad we have established that the federal government is not a proactive, reactive body. It's something for us to always remember. No matter what bill moves around here, it's something to remember about the federal government. But be that as it may, first question I have for you guys, this is kind of a significant story here. Just out of curiosity, just to see how the federal government operates, has anybody lost their job over this, or has there any been recriminations in that regard? Sure, we'll give you the question.
No, sir. No, sir.
Oh, okay. Okay. Next question. I don't care who answers it. As I understand, it took months for the State Department to root out the Russian hackers in their unclassified systems. Now, apparently the Chinese hackers are known for leaving behind time-delayed malware. Do we know for sure that these people are out of the system by now, or could they still be poking around?
Representative, we have a joint interagency team led by DHS with participation by the FBI and National Security Agency who have worked with OPM and the Department of Interior on this incident. They have assessed that they have fully removed the adversary from these networks, but it is extremely difficult to have 100% certainty in these cases.
Okay, so it could be, but you think probably out.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Final question. Apparently there are rumors that people are now selling some of these files. Is this a threat, or do we know if it's going on? And if it's going on, are we doing anything to counter that?
Sir, I think that's the impact and such are questions better suited for the classified briefing we're about to have.
Okay. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists and everybody that's here. I think you understand on a bipartisan basis how serious we take this situation. To those federal employees who are affected, one of the things that should come out is in the letter, at the very end of the letter, if you receive one of these letters, it does note that the Office of Personnel Management is not going to call you. They're not going to contact you to provide additional information. There will be some very bad actors that are going to try to take advantage of this bad situation and exploit it for their own personal gain. They've already done that. They're going to do it again, and there are going to be others that are going to try to do that. To all of our federal employees, please do not fall victim yet again to somebody who's going to send you an email or make a call and try to prey upon you further. That was noted in the letter. It's worth noting here from the pulpit. And again, we look forward to the 1 o'clock classified briefing. We're going to have to hustle. The committee now stands adjourned. Thank you.